Okay, this is going to sound extremely unromantic, but my wife and I said, okay, we're going to a marriage. So we're going to treat this emotionally apart as a merger and acquisition transaction. I would like to see it as a merger. She definitely thinks that I was acquired.
Each one of us is cash flow. You got to make sure we are cash flow positive. That's a very basic starting point. If your expenses are way above your income, then I think you really need to have a conversation together to try and scale things back. Because if you have no savings, you can't talk about a lot of things.
The important thing to talk about is whatever is troubling you personally. So if you know that you've got aged parents or you have to take care of her, it's something to talk about when you get married.
Do you have any fights or any tension when you were having these conversations? As we were coming up with this topic as well, it was something that resonated with me, right? I'm married, I have 2 kids, 2 young kids. And when I had this conversation with my spouse before we got married, it was extremely tricky. You know, because you always go into it thinking, I need to protect myself, I have my own self-interest. But it's so unromantic, right? It's, you know, it's completely unromantic talking about money. And it's a very difficult topic that, you know, all of us Asians have difficulty with, whether it's with our spouse, whether it's talking to our boss about race. So I'm very glad to have my panelists with me. But before we get to the meat and bones of all of this, why don't I let the panelists introduce themselves a bit. And, you know, because we are in start of the year, icebreaker question, tell us a bit about the last tricky conversation you had about money.
It was to justify flying here to attend this podcast. So I'm based in Thailand, but to have this opportunity to talk about finance, to be with OCBC and Financial Coconut, it was a no-brainer. But even small little things like flying from Singapore to Thailand is a conversation that I have to have with my spouse.
My name is Vasu. You know, essentially for me, it was a conversation about investments. So my wife has left all the investment decisions to me, but I also felt that it came to a point in time where she should play a slightly more proactive role. She's lived up to it. She's done a pretty good job, I must say. Probably even better than me in the last few months investing in the market. So I'm very glad that she's, you know, got on to learning how to invest, and she's learning very quickly. So I'm quite happy about that conversation I had with her.
Hi, I'm Kai Yun. So I'm the lawyer in the house. I've been doing family law disputes for a long time, and because I always see it only at the end when people are fighting over the divorce or the estate or how to handle the affairs of a family member who's not well. In the last 10 years or so, I thought that I would get into family law structuring instead of just disputes so that I can help my clients do things right and do things right from the beginning. So I'm really glad to be able to come here and to share with all of you today. Okay, a tricky question about money was just before coming here, I signed a prenuptial agreement. So I actually had to give the advice that I'm sharing now.
And just to be clear, she's telling us a lot of things today, but not formal legal advice, yeah? I help her to disclaimer. Then, you know, just to get back on today's topic, when you think of a financially stable marriage, or if you think of a stable marriage, right? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
I think of a couple, a relationship that is very stable because at least they got their finances in order. And I would like to find out what their secret sauce is.
Why is there a secret sauce? Don't you have the secret sauce?
Yes, but I would like to see other people's secret sauce and then like make an even better sauce.
Well, financially stable marriage is one where, you know, you are transparent with each other, you communicate with each other, and you set in place the foundations for financial security to make sure that, you know, it doesn't become an issue with your marriage or in time to come. So to me, that's important. The communication, the discussion, the transparency, and of course, you know, putting in place some kind of a plan, a structure that provides you the pillar to support your marriage. Of course, marriage is more than just about financial support. It goes beyond that. But at least as far as the financial support is concerned, you know, if it's there, then it provides some degree of financial security.
To me, financially stable is not just how much you have or how much you do not have, but it's really a question of working together. It is stable if you work together. It's not stable when you're not working together. So to me, that's a financially stable marriage.
This is actually quite nice because I like all these high-flying ideas.
Oh.
we won't get into the
Nice.
details. We'll get into the details, but I really like this whole thing about, you know, it's about habits, it's about alignment, it's about trust, it's about communication, right? Because at least from my perspective, money is important, of course, but it's a tool. It's a tool for us to get to the life that we want. So we need to be able to talk about it cleanly and very neatly. So, well, it is still a bit awkward, at least for me as an Asian and Singaporean, to talk a bit about money. So we ran this together, but let's just go right back to the very beginning, right? And from the looks of the audience today, it's just that everybody's at the very stage, right? No, hopefully no second, third, fourth marriages here. First one. So, but before you even propose or before you even say I do, what I wanted for my experience was to have a talk, right? Have a real conversation, sit down, we start planning our life together, right? That to me was the framing. I want to plan our life together so that it works out. But so let's talk about those crucial conversations right at the very beginning. Did you do the same thing, or was it the same approach that you took to your own marriage as well?
Definitely, without a doubt, what you just said resonates with me. I am a father of two very young kids. Before we get married, we sat down, we had some interesting conversations. But I think what I've learned is that you don't want to deep dive into bank accounts, assets, liabilities, finances right at the onset, because then you just put the person off, right? So I think you got to do the broad strokes, suss out what each other wants, in the mid-term, long-term, before you go into details. So once you get that sorted out, the broad strokes, that, both of you agree that you need financial security, both of you agree that you need a shared vision, both of you agree that you need to plan. Once you've got those things sorted out and you all agree that you need to do that, then you go one step further and you go into your assets, your liabilities, and everything else, right? And then a plan to make it grow, to help you fund your goals that you want to achieve in the marriage. So it's a systematic process. I guess in my case, I had a slight advantage because I've spent all my life in the wealth management, financial planning industry. My wife, on the other hand, was completely clueless. So trying to get her onto the same page was not easy at the beginning because she didn't see the need for the conversation, right? But then, I think it is a question of impressing upon her the fact that, let's deal with the why. If you can get her to understand why we need to do this, then I think she's going to be willing to do it. So eventually, over a period of time, it's an ongoing process. It's a conversation that goes on. Even until today, I have the conversation. I think it's helped to build up slowly. And as I told you earlier, she's begun the investment journey. And to get here, we have been working on it for quite a while. And I must say, I'm very happy that, she's now beginning to understand a lot of things that, I have spent 40 years doing.
How I started talking about money with my then fiance, now wife, was firstly, it's a self-selection bias. Like, I'm very passionate about personal finance. So naturally, that's all I talk about. But I'm a bit luckier than you, Vasu. My wife also has a background in finance. So the conversation was a little bit easier. So the way we actually sat down was, okay, this is going to sound extremely unromantic, but my wife and I said, okay, we're going to a marriage. So we're going to treat this emotionally apart as a merger and acquisition transaction. Okay, I would like to see it as a merger. She definitely thinks that I was acquired. So as with any mergers and acquisitions, right, you do your due diligence. You find out your assets, your liability, any hidden risks, any potentials for synergies. So it sounds very unromantic, but that really helped us open up the conversation because it was something that we were both familiar with. We like watching, finance shows about which company getting acquired. So we could relate to that and it made that whole conversation a little bit more smoother, less friction, less awkward. So we naturally see each other like, okay, company A, what do you have? Company B, what do you have? We list down everything. And then we also just like when you want to acquire a company, you ask what is the forward projection. You also ask like, hey, what are your money values? Where do you see family? How much are you willing to spend? How much you prioritize like childhood education, private versus public? So things like this all started naturally to come up. So yeah, that's how we started.
Just as a bit of a follow-up, right? Did you have any fights or any tension when you were having these conversations? Or all smooth sailing?
Definitely not smooth sailing. There'll be arguments, but I think importantly, you got to eventually recognize the fact that you have a shared vision. I think as long as both of you recognize the fact that, you have a shared vision and you're in this together, not for the next 1 week, 2 weeks, or the next 1-2 years, but for the long haul, that you may eventually want to start a family, have children. The children need money for education. You need money for this and that. So it's a very long journey. As long as your spouse recognizes that, okay, and that's the tough part. Once you recognize it, that's it. Then it becomes a lot easier. The conversation becomes, how do we then achieve it? How do we do it? Right? So, of course, the beginning, nobody likes talking about money. Money is deeply personal, but it's something that's necessary, right? It is something that's uncomfortable, but absolutely necessary.
On my end, definitely there's arguments because you are bringing as much as you love each other, you're bringing two completely different individuals with different risk profile, different investment proficiency. So I can give you an example, like all my 14 years of working, I set aside at least 50% of my take-home pay for investments. So from my wife's perspective, it's like, that is very high amount. And what are you investing in? So then, like, why are you putting so much risk or half your eggs into one basket, right? So then it took a while to really explain why I came out with this, and then there was pushback. This is too risky. So that whole episode was filled with sort of like, why are you so risky? Why can't you just take it a step back as well?
That's the crux of it, right? Like you disagree on the parts, but you end up making it work. Because otherwise, you're just not going to get married. And maybe that's why this is an important conversation, because this is also a bit of a process about finding out at a deeper level what each other person wants and whether you can get to a shared goal.
Now, if you don't have the conversation and you think you can bypass it and you go into a marriage, you may have to deal with the conversation when you are married, and then it becomes even more uncomfortable down the road, in which case there's effectively no turning back unless you exit.
And then you go talk to Kyrene.
we don't want that. So I think the important thing is to sit down and talk to each other before and not after.
I personally agree with that so much, and I think it's under talked about, which is the consequences of a failed sort of relationship is actually very high in Singapore just because of our unique construct. So let's just use the BTO as an example, right? The moment your relationship fails, you are not only having to deal with a relationship that went sour, but you have to deal with all the aftermaths of like, what happens to these assets? Do we even get to keep the asset, or do we have to return it and incur that finance? And earlier, Anthony, you said that we are getting married later. So while getting married later means that we have more assets, that means that more assets are at risk as well, right? And it also means that we have less time to try again, right? Because we are older already. So it really is a risk that we need to talk about.
Positive examples from the two of you. Kyrene, I'm sorry, but negative examples. I mean, you have obviously seen a lot of more acrimonious relationships ending. From your perspective, have you seen any behaviors or habits that would help people be more successful in their relationships?
So you can see from the two positive examples that they are very open with each other. They are open to share. They are open to learn. I think the difficulty I have is that, especially when I'm doing disputes, by the time they see me, they are already in a fight, right? Sometimes in the doorstep of litigation. So they are already in positions. So nobody is open anymore because they are in positions, right? So actually, what's very amazing about it, when it's right at the beginning, you're going to start something new together, start this aspect anew as well. Don't wait until you are in my office telling me your positions. You won't be open anymore.
As you say, when they get to you, they are apart, right? Are there methods to help bridge that gap?
Yes, you'd be amazed to hear that actually lawyers sometimes do manage to salvage the relationship. In fact, one of the lesser known things is that we always talk about prenups. Why do we often have postnups? It is because we are trying to do a settlement between the husband and wife so that they will not go for a divorce, or amongst the family members with a deed of arrangement so that they won't sue each other to fight over the estate. So it is possible to actually work some common sense into people to make sure they see things from each other's point of view. But it's so much harder when there is already a dispute. It's so much easier if you did it right from the beginning, which is why I said I'm in a happier mode lawyering when I am lawyering the structuring rather than lawyering the disputes.
We'll definitely get back onto that. But maybe just, to finish up this whole point around, how do you talk about it right at the very beginning? If there is one topic, so back on the details, if there is one topic that you think somebody should definitely discuss, what would it be?
Then personal finance for sure, but within the realm of personal finance,
Yes.
I think even something as simple as budget. Like most of us don't even know our own budget. So if we both go into a relationship blindly with just spending as and when we feel like it, or without any sort of guardrails or methodology behind it, just talking about the budget with each other would then unlock a lot of sort of unconscious biases or spending habits that may help you avoid conflict in the future.
Absolutely, totally agreed, Shao. And what I did was, being the wealth management person myself, I have a spreadsheet, right?
How many tabs do you have? So it sounds like at least 10.
No. Simple spreadsheet because I'm dealing with my wife who's a novice to financial planning. So I have to make it simple. So I laid it out all real simply, right? Your income, your expenses, and I break down the expenses, into different buckets, right? Including property, and then like maybe the car, maybe like the cost of children, so on and so forth, and then you get an idea. Your income minus expenses should be positive. If it is not positive, it's a problem. And numbers don't lie, right? So when you put the numbers down, you get a very clear idea as to what the final number is. This minus that should be a positive. How positive is it? And sadly, I've been in the industry for a long time, and there are people I speak to and I ask them, do you know how much you spend every month? And people say, I roughly know lah. How much? It's like maybe like 3,000, 4,000. But when you start putting down the numbers, then you suddenly get a number that pops in and says, oh, am I really spending so much? So I think it's important to put it down. And I put it down to my wife. She didn't quite like it. She said, don't show me the spreadsheet. That sort of thing. But guess what? After showing her several times, finally she said, well, now I get a better picture how our money is moving around, and now she's completely, every time something happens, a life change happens, let's go back to the spreadsheet and change the number. So I've gotten her aware of the cash flow. Each one of us is cash flow. You got to make sure we are cash flow positive. That's a very basic starting point. If your expenses are way above your income, then I think you really need to have a conversation together to try and scale things back, right? So it's to me that's the starting point. Because if you have no savings, then you can't talk about buying insurance, you can't talk about investments, you can't talk about a lot of things. You got to make sure that you're cash flow positive and have the means to save.
The important thing to talk about is whatever is troubling you personally. So if you know that you've got aged parents, your mom is down with dementia, you have to take care of her. It's something to talk about when you get married. If you know that you have got other commitments, you are in a job that's dependent on investments, you believe in that, that's going to cause some instability, insecurity, you got to talk about it. If you have a certain expectation that you want to own your own home and you want to do it within a certain time, you've got to talk about it. So whatever is dearest to your heart, you've got to talk about it.
I love it, right? We went from very practical budget spreadsheets to what are your hopes and dreams? This is great.
It's rare for the lawyer to have the nicest last say, very rare. So I'm relishing this.
But I must say that, not everybody has this capacity to, do the spreadsheet as such, right? So sometimes you need some help, some guidance, right? And I guess this is where, you have people like OCBC with advisors, even people out there, a lot of advisors out there. But the key thing is this, it's just like your personal fitness. You don't have the capacity to do it yourself. Then you go to a gym instructor who pushes you a little bit, guides you. And so take it in the same vein, right? Go to an advisor who will hopefully guide you, who has your best interest at heart. I think that's important because not all of us are designed to do this. I'm quite lucky because, I spent so many years in the industry. So my wife in some ways is lucky because, I know how to do that. But not everybody can do it. But I think it's important that you get down to the skinny.
I like all of what we've talked about planning and about trust and transparency, right? All of that is very important. But I'm also a lawyer and I like structure. I like rules and some sort of rigidity so that we all know what we are playing with, right? We know the rules of the game. And that's always the key to me. When you are about to get married, when you are just married, this is the best time to talk about bad things, right? Because you are in it together. You hope for the best, of course, but you can talk nicely about what could go wrong. And so let's talk a bit about structure and how you can, when you are a family unit, manage your finances together, right? But maybe let's start with the structural thing, because Kyrene mentioned a bit about postnups and presumably the opposite of that, prenups. What are these things? How can we think about them, and how can we utilize these as tools that either help to guide the conversation or to guide what happens next during marriage?
Prenups are the contracts that you sign with your spouse to be before you get married. So lots of people come and tell me that, oh, it's so unromantic, this job of structuring. You try and sell prenups to people who really love each other and just want to get married. But actually, that's not quite true. Because whilst prenups could traditionally say what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine, we also can put into the prenup other expectations that flow from that conversation, right? So, for example, in the prenup that I did today, which shall remain nameless, he knows that he's going to inherit, right? And it's coming soon, but he's already, has plans to get married. So, of course, the parents said, you have to enter into a prenuptial agreement, because what if you go for a divorce? All the things that your mom and I worked so hard to amass, you're going to share it with this spouse-to-be, right? Which is, if you think about it, very reasonable, right? Because surely you don't expect to marry into his household and suddenly have a windfall because he was working on Excel sheets all his life. So at the end of the day, we had a talk about it. We were actually quite open about it. And she then said, okay, but you are also working for your family. What if your parents never allowed you to put anything into the marriage? Then it would be very unfair, right? Okay, so after the several conversations, awkward as it is, we did have a prenuptial agreement that says that whatever is given by the parents and amassed from it, that will be kept separate as the parents wanted. But because the parents also recognize that this is a new couple and they do want to bless this couple, they had an agreement in the prenup that both of them would put their earnings, including whatever he earns from the family business, into a joint account for the family. And just to show that the parents don't have anything personal against the daughter-in-law, they even put in seed money and ang pao money into the bank account. So the misconception about prenuptial agreements is that they are so rigid, that it's only what's yours is yours and what's mine is mine. It's not true. There are other misconceptions about prenuptial agreements.
Are prenuptials even enforceable?
Okay, so another one is they are not strictly enforceable in Singapore. It's only taken into account, then why sign it? Okay, so touch wood, 30% of our marriages end up in divorces. At least you have a document that tells you the outcome without your having to go through a long drawn in court. But if you ask me, the prenuptial agreement is not even your insurance when you go to court. It is really a way to start the conversation the way I did for the family I met today. That at the end of the day, because you have an agreement, as with all contracts, you have a roadmap. You have an understanding. If you were going to move into your in-laws' house, you can have a nuptial agreement talking about it's never going to be mine because I'm the son-in-law moving in. Then do I pay for renovations? No, I don't, because it's never going to be my house. But does that mean that with the income that's freed, because I no longer have to pay for rent or a household, you will allow me to buy a property in my own name that does not need to be put into the pool for division? So actually, contracts, as with all contracts, can be very alive, and you can actually put a lot of things into it.
You can write whatever you want in, right? Just how creative you are. And that's why you look for her. That's kind of the point and my understanding, right? But just to put it within a bit of a legal framework, at least my understanding was, yeah, sure, what you come in with is yours, and what she comes in with hers. But what you all get together during the marriage, that's matrimonial assets that's able to be split during the divorce. right? Inheritance may be part of it, maybe not, depending on the facts. So how does that work in the context of let's say, your latest prenup, right? Is it because that they have split it already, so it's not really considered matrimonial assets, or how does that, is there actually a distinction?
You are right that the law is quite uncertain, right? Because what's in sole or joint names, even if it's not in your name but beneficially yours, because we believe that somebody somebody else is holding on trust for you, those could form part of the pool of matrimonial assets. So the good thing about the nuptial agreement I did today, it's very clear. What's from the parents, whatever accrues to that, that's not part of the pool. But what we grow together in the course of marriage is part of the pool, and we have a commitment that whatever we earn respectively will form part of that pool. So the good thing about structuring it is that you get away from the uncertainties of the law. Actually, a big part of it is because all of us in a Singapore context, and I was just speaking to Shao about it, we all stand to inherit from our parents. Or they would want to leave something to us the way that we would want to leave something for our children. And like it or not, because Singapore is so small, whenever we have kids, our parents end up looking after our kids. Our kids get used to staying with our parents. Sometimes we continue staying with our parents. What does it mean? It means that a lot of my parents' wealth is going to be embroidered in the marriage that I'm in. So to be fair to them, having lawyerly thinking and structuring is good because it gives certainty and assurance to those parents as well. So in that sense, it does give certainty that the parents who allowed you to stay in their house, or who may have put, a share of it in the son's name so that he can take a loan and do it up nicer, is not going to stand to lose that HDB flat as a matrimonial asset because she genuinely wanted to take care of the grandchildren and allowed the family to move in. So it's just to give that family a roadmap to organize their finances.
So that's the legal structuring, but I kept hearing a lot about bank accounts, so that's for Vasu. How do you and your wife actually manage your money that you get in, right? Positive cash flow, great, but do you have joint accounts? Are they each your own? How do you manage this in practice?
This is peculiar to me, doesn't apply to everybody. So I believe my philosophy towards marriage is you marry for life, right? So divorce is not something that even features in my head. And I think just like any mergers and acquisitions or joint ventures, they come with risk. And, so I believe in taking the risk, right? So with me and my wife, our assets are commingled, right? So there's no way to tell which belongs to her, which belongs to mine. It's all commingled. And and so essentially, this is the pool of money that the family has. This is the pool of money that we will grow. This is the pool of money that goes into funding our short-term, medium-term, long-term needs, including our golden years. And if anybody wants to really, deplete the pool in a big way, then you're affecting your children, your partner, and your, long-term shared vision and relationship. So that's my view. It doesn't mean that everybody shares it. So, so talking about the worst case scenario that you mentioned. So the worst case scenario in this case was, the marriage failure. So the worst case scenario after you get married can also be a case where if you're not transparent, it's very hard to do what I'm doing. But I have a file at home called the death file. Okay, a death file. So in that file, it contains everything that me and my wife owns, right? Insurance policies, bank deposits, everything. Exactly all the details, right? To the finest detail. Call this person if something happens. Call OCBC HR, this person. Everything. It's all there. It's called the death file, right? And why do I have this file? Because I think what a lot of people underestimate is in the events one of the partner passes on, what happens very often is the other one is grappling, trying to find out where the assets are, where the money is, how do I fund it, So I have that very uncomfortable conversation. Death is always a morbid conversation. So I have this file called the death file. And that file is only possible if you believe in trust and transparency, right? Because here's a case where there are no secrets between me and my wife. She knows what I own, what I have, to the finest detail. I know what she owns to the finest detail. And it's all shared, completely transparent. And if something does happen tomorrow, I've even outlined the first 5 things she should do. So, I think you do it because you want to make sure that your partner is taken care of, your children is taken care of, and, life can go on. So that is how I plan as well for a worst case scenario, from my perspective.
Would your view change if you had very uneven financial contributions to the marriage?
Let me put it this way. Contributions to a marriage are never going to be even. Some of it will be financial, some of it will be not. My wife is much younger than me. Of course, I came into the marriage with a lot more assets and resources. She came with a lot less. But she was doing very well in her career. In fact, she was a lawyer and she was doing extremely well in her career. But she also gave up a job in the last 3 years to look after our children, and I can see the benefits of it. So how do you value that, right? So you cannot put down value to these sort of things, right? So for me to say, look, you're not earning a single cent, I'm the one who's working, and therefore you can't spend, I think that's not how a shared relationship should work. I believe that, at the end of the day, it's about trust and recognizing the fact that each individual has got its strengths and is contributing in different ways. So you got to look at the total contribution and not just financial contribution, I feel.
I'm very touched. I get what you mean theoretically, right? Because my wife stays at home herself as well. But I always find it a bit tricky personally going, did you really need to spend that money on Shopee? Right? I have Shopee parcels at my home every day. So it's things like this that, it's a bit of a mental barrier that sometimes needs to be overcome, even as much as intellectually I agree with you.
Of course. So my wife as well, she sometimes goes off tangent. So it's a matter of, sitting down and having regular conversations. I think having this constant, regular communication is important. As I said, part of a very good relationship, I think, financial and otherwise, is trust, transparency, communication, and compromise. Let's not forget that marriage is an exercise in compromise. You can't make that person what you want the person to be, and that person can't make you what she wants you to be, right? So I think it's a compromise. She may go off tangent, but unless she goes in a big way off tangent, I'll tell her, look, do we need to do that? Does it make sense? So just to give you an example, like when we travel now this spreadsheet thing has really gotten to my wife, right? And now she's got spreadsheets for every travel. So she breaks it down, by hotel, transport, even to the detail. I said, is it necessary to go into this kind of detail? And so at the end of it also, I say, okay, we're going to Shanghai, and she comes out a spreadsheet for 10 days, and she says it's going to cost us this. And she says, is this within our budget that you have in your bigger spreadsheet? It's like, wow, okay. This is like, okay, right? This is rather interesting. But so I think that's important. So if she goes off tangent and we have this conversation, because now she's got on with the program, and because we've been having this communication and exchange, now she accepts it, and she knows that, some expenses are, but at the same time, when she meets her friends and she spends $150, $200 on a nice meal, hey, I'm not going to complain.
That's perfectly acceptable.
Acceptable? Look, I'm not going to complain because, look, why not? You deserve it. You work hard at home. See how she manages our kids, and I can't do it, and it's like, wow, that's worse than what I do, man. I'd rather be in the office,
Inspirational. Shao, how about you? And how you manage your finances or your shared finances with your wife?
Firstly, I just want to say something that I think I got a bit of comfort hearing Vasu, because you spend many years in, like, when you think of financial proficiency at the highest level, you think of someone of his background, but even he is not having a joint account with his wife. So suddenly I feel like I'm not that bad. But what I got out of it is that you don't need to be so precise, but as long as your communications are open, right, and you share a similar direction and a shared vision. So that's something I got comfort. In terms of me and my wife, similar to what Vasu said, it's a open communication. Like, I also, funnily, I didn't call it Death Note, but I also have an envelope with everything, with screenshots of like my accounts and who to call and everything as well. The other thing that I had an open conversation with my wife is that when we get married, we are not just marrying each other, both financially and non-financially. We're marrying each other's prior lives and future families. So a simple example is like, okay, before getting married, we are getting married later. So you have a lot of time to have prior commitments, such as I'm taking care of my family, my aged parents, I'm contributing to the mortgage or to the household expense. Then I go ahead and start another family. The conversation then becomes uncomfortable because like the money that you're giving to your old family, do you then bring it here to us? Or are you still going to give that much? And then what's left for us? So that was something that was new to me because I always thought that getting married is just me and my wife, we make all the decisions. But her definition and her family's definition of debt, of assets, of borrowing money and things like that may conflict with mine. So that was something that we had to talk about as well.
Just to pick on that last point about family, and we have mentioned multiple times that a lot of this is really unsexy, sometimes a bit boring talk, right? So what would, how do you draw the line, right? Because you don't want to spend your entire relationship, or you don't want to, before every meal, go back to check your budget, how whether you can spend it or not. You don't ask permission. So how do you think you draw the line between, okay, fine, everybody has their freedom, but we still have, our shared vision, our shared goals? Or is there anything practical that you do to make sure that, we work towards the same thing?
For me and my wife, at the start of the year, we have an AGM, okay? Okay, last year, this is our P&L. This year, where do we see ourselves with our P&L? It sounds very boring, but once you had that conversation at the start of the year, you're done. You're done. You don't need to have that conversation anymore. So then, 3 months later, if I decide to go crazy and go to Japan for a snowboarding trip and buy all my equipment and everything, is all within the budget, right? So I don't need to have that argument or need to become defensive as with most husbands, about why I'm doing this, because I already had the conversation. So it is in your own interest to have that conversation upfront as well, so that this year is a World Cup year, right? If I want to go with my friends to go watch the World Cup or whatever, it's gonna be a huge expense as well, right? So I have that conversation upfront as well.
So are you going?
No. The cost of going to the US is pretty high right now, both financially and non. So yeah, I decided to not go.
Vasu?
Yeah, so for couples, financial planning is not a one-time event, right? So I want to make this very clear. It's not a one-time event. OCBC's view is that it's a shared journey, right? It's something that is ongoing. You can do it as an annual general meeting, as Shao does, on an annual basis, or like in my case, I typically tend to have a conversation once every quarter, just to take stock of things. It doesn't have to be in a formal setting where we go into a meeting room, we say, okay, come, let's pull out a PowerPoint slide or whatever it is.
Meetings, the minutes from the last discussion.
Exactly. It can be over dinner, we just have a chat, especially for me, if I see anything go off tangent or she sees something and she brings it up, and we just have a conversation. And, but the key thing is when you start off, you need to have that first time when you plan to have your cash flow in order to make sure that you have understanding of expenses minus income minus expenses, and then also look at your investments. To see whether investments are invested properly. So I have done all that. I mean, I've done the basic stuff that maybe a financial planner, advisor can advise you. The basic stuff that you do at the beginning, and then something you can review on a quarterly basis. So you need to have a structured approach. It's not random. Not like, I don't think I'm spending a lot of money. No, but, I think you need to have some structure. And then once you have the structure in place, you just review it once every quarter. It doesn't have to be a formal setting. It sometimes can be an informal setting where, you roughly know and you just have a conversation. And maybe once a year, you look at it more formally. But it is an ongoing process because life changes, right? Our life goals will keep changing. And don't forget, inflation is usually an underestimated expense, right? For many, many couples. Inflation. Because, as you progress in your journey as a couple, you'd want to have a nice meal, nice holiday, and inflation starts creeping into your expenses and you fail to recognize it. And of course, the other underestimated expense I feel is that, very often, especially if you're marrying later, you have to deal with your in-laws as well. So like in my case, my parents have passed on and I looked after them for a good 20 years. I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for having done that. So now it's my in-laws. They're also in their 80s. And so, my wife, she doesn't really think about it. And I think it's normal for people not to really think about things like this. So I'm somebody who pays a lot of attention to that sort of detail. And so I think it's important for couples to think through all this as they plan their finances. So it's not just you, but they're also, like as Shao said, you're marrying into a network, right? The kampong is, your family. So you got to make sure that you provide for the kampong as well sometimes.
I want to talk about the kampong. I like that. But then just about, your basic quarterly checkups, right? What's basic to you? I'm envisioning like, a dozen spreadsheets. That's not the
Oh, no,
case, right?
just one single spreadsheet with income minus expenses. And then, essentially income minus expenses, you have savings. That's it.
So just an income statement. No balance sheet, no cash flow
Balance
statement.
sheet is another spreadsheet.
Yeah. Okay.
So when I say balance sheet, it cannot just be about your cash. You got to look at your investments. So, I mean, of course, if you want to go down to the details, I break it down into, for example, equities. I break it down into bonds. I break it down into gold. I break it down into other things. And then I even calculate my interest income from each of this, my yield. I project it forward, maybe 10 years to see where this is all going. So it's a complicated spreadsheet. But I keep it simple because when I show it to my wife, it's too much information. Right? So if you know how to do it, it's fine. But if you don't know how to do it, it's always nice to go and get some help to at least guide you through. So the balance sheet is important. How you're investing your money and whether you're investing it well. That's also very important because your money is not static, it grows. It has to grow.
Are there any specific tools that you use for this, or is it all just kind of basic?
Well, actually, I do it myself. There are tools out there. There are some available in OCBC as well that you can go to. But, I get a thrill from doing it. I get a high from doing it, I guess, part and parcel of the job, right? So that gives me as well, when each time I invest in something, I get an idea of my asset allocation. I get an idea of how it impacts my interest income. I can see my capital gains, so I enjoy doing it. But, there are financial planners out there. There are tools out there. OCBC is more than happy to help you if you come to us. And I think for many people, they don't have what I have in terms of 40 years of knowledge. It's always good to go and see an advisor, right? And there's no harm in going to see an advisor, even if you don't have to buy what they tell you to buy, but at least, see somebody who can guide you.
And I kind of thought that was the important thing to me, right? Just so that you go somewhere or you have somebody to talk to at the beginning that sets a framework out for you. Because we keep talking about it today. It's quite a consistent theme. It's about the big picture. We have the shared vision, and then we all work towards it, right? I mean, sure, we'll change things along the way, but once you get the framework right, you can't go too wrong as long as you stick to the plan, right? Then just okay, we keep talking about kampong, so I do have to get to this. So just on the kampong bit, right? As all of you have mentioned, you marry into a family, right? That's your parents. The government will hope there are future kids. That there's a lot of things that we will need to consider, and life is eventful, right? Life is not a spreadsheet, fortunately or unfortunately. So when we think about that long term, right? Or if you're younger, the long term or the very long term for your kids, right? What are some things that you think about? What are some things that you can do? What are some tools that you can use? Maybe again, we start with Kai Yun, the more legal structuring bits, and then we move into the practical considerations after that.
When you actually get married and you merge two lives together, then obviously there are some legalities surrounding it. And it's not about doing prenuptial agreements, but you should think about what about leaving wills, or getting lasting power of attorneys, actually for your parents and even for yourselves. And it's always very sad when these, you might think they're very small, boring things, but if you don't address it and it finally becomes a problem, it's really very sad. So there are cases where parents, they stay with quite typically, like the unmarried sibling, always the girl, and then when they become unsound, they realize all their finances are handled, let's say, by the married son. You then have to decide, because there wasn't an LPA for the parents in place, if you were married to that son, do you then now take your in-law and move them in because, like it or not, the finances are now being handled by your husband? So if you had these things planned out, it also means that you have some stability in your married life. Right, so you can have some, like Vasu says, it's an ongoing conversation because life happens.
What's LPA actually? Or when can it be used?
Okay, so that's the lasting power of attorney. if you can go to any doctor and sign a form. You could have it general or you can have it specific. What it does is that you appoint a donee, somebody that you can empower either to handle your finances or to handle your affairs, right? Your medical decisions. So it could be really generic, or you can actually spell out in detail, so and so can visit me, so and so can be, such bank accounts can be spent. I preferred for this to be paid up first. So you can actually specify in quite some detail if ever you lose mental capacity, how you like your affairs to be handled.
So it's about losing mental capacity and the inability to make your own decisions. That's why
Yes.
there's somebody with the power to make decisions for you.
And I believe even the government has a resource for it, right? Because my dad just did it coincidentally, like giving me and my brother authority to it, and we just need to go SingPass and just sign up. But he needed to go to a doctor to actually prove that he is of sound of mind now to nominate us. But everything was besides that was very smooth. With SingPass, it was quite easy to do.
Since you just did it recently, so thank you for volunteering yourself. How was that conversation like with your parents?
This is a tough one. So we talked about having that open communication with your spouse, and you keep saying, as Asians, it's not easy to talk about money. So it's already not easy talking about money and death to your spouse, much less like older folks, like both sides of the family, their parents, like, okay, literally they're saying, okay, when you die, what do you want to do? Like some people don't even like to have the word death said in a sentence, right? For my case, there was a huge PR spin by the government to nominate your LPA. So that became my excuse or window to talk about it. Like, hey, the government is, besides giving us CDC voucher, there's this other thing that they are doing for us as well. So that helped open up the conversation. And also because my father, now he's by himself, he also took because he saw those messages, I believe he took the proactivity and did it.
So it's not, if you don't do this now, you have to see a lawyer and pay more money to do it later. So
you can go down that path as well. Like, you want to give more money away, or why not give it to me? Then
So, okay, then maybe Karen, just to put the spotlight back on you. Wills, LPAs, anything else that, instruments about planning, whether it's mental capacity or things like that?
There are lots of different structures that could be set up for wealth planning. Okay, in fact, also just today, I had a blended family. So he has children, adult children from a previous marriage, and then young children with the new wife, right? And one of their concerns was that if they are not around, the intent for the children of both sides, right, to inherit. But because these are half siblings, and like it or not, the children from the first marriage are much older. So they were talking about, okay, then do we set up a different structure, like a family office or a trust, so that it doesn't, you just give it to the older sibling, directly, but that there's a manner to manage things. So actually there are lots of different legal tools, as with investment tools and financial tools, that people can use for financial planning, right? So the whole point is to get yourself educated to know what's out there.
That's kind of the legal structuring side of it. Then for Vasu, the financial side of it, right? How do you plan for the worst? Is it insurances? Is it just investing and making sure you're rich enough? What's your view on things like that?
First step is always insurance, to make sure there's enough protection for you, your family, and then if you can impress that upon your in-laws as well, that's great, because if they do have insurance, then it helps to defray costs, because if they have to turn to you for help, then it also depletes your resources. So, I think insurance is very important. And for me, life insurance is very important, because if you are a couple and you have children, and say your partner decides to stop working and, something happens to you, something unfortunate happens and you pass on, at least the life insurance policy will be there to provide some degree of support to your wife and your children. And that gives you some degree of peace of mind. I think the second thing is, of course, hospital insurance. That's very, very important, especially as when you're going to get married, you plan to have children. I think that's the first thing you do when your child is born. That's almost the first thing I did when my kids were born, to get a hospital insurance, because extremely expensive. Critical illness cover, personal accident cover. So those things need to be taken care of. Now, once you've taken care of those things, and those are what I call the hygiene elements. You take care of them. There's a non-negotiable. Then you talk about then growing your money, right? Systematically growing your money, and that's important as well. And how you grow your money is very, very important, because if you invest it too conservatively, then it will not grow fast enough for your retirement and for your children's education, and for other needs that you may have down the road. So I think, again, that's something to be looked at very, very carefully. And so in my case, because I'm in the industry, so I look at things myself. But for those who don't know what to do, then of course they can go to an advisor. Again, OCBC has a lot of relationship managers, who can help you, and the others out there as well, that you should go to for guidance, right? So insurance, investments, and of course, to me, the third, probably, I'm not sure whether the order is right, but the third element is again, wills and LPAs, which I've done. Right, I've done all the wills for me, my wife, my in-laws, and everything is transparent. We can see each other's wills, and so essentially, mostly everything is good. I think that's quite important.
Then, Shao, anything to add on all of that?
I think earlier Kai Yun talked about like creating trust, and for me, sometimes it's very intimidating. But actually, there are public resources for you to nominate, like succession planning as well. Like even your CPF, you can like put in your nominee, right? Like to your earlier point, like you have two sets of children from two separate families. Like your CPF, you can nominate however wish. So these are some of the things that are within our control. That if you feel that it's too intimidating to start all beginning, there's actually a little bit more like seamless approach out there for you to kickstart that.
I think that's been very helpful. We have covered, before marriage, death, don't like that word, so I'm not going to mention it too much, but it's a whole cycle. One last question from me before the audience, and this is for once me trying to be romantic, so my wife should appreciate this, right? What would be one piece of relationship advice that you would give to the audience?
Since we're on the topic of marriage, right? To me, how I review my own marriage is I adopted a mindset of it's all in. It is all in. So this is the person that is the mother of my child, my partner for the rest of my life. I'm going to spend my everything with her. So therefore, I have to be as transparent as possible. If I lack communication or transparency, I'm just creating more pain for myself, more friction for myself further. So having that mindset of it's all in and having that communication it sounds easier, and we often don't do it. But when you don't, and I'm surrounded by a lot of couples that actually don't, you just keep seeing a lot of unnecessary misunderstandings or conflicts that you ask yourself, do you want to go through that? Do you have the headspace? Do you have the patience for that? And I don't. I already lost all my hair already. I don't want to do any more of that. So the earlier you do it, the better it is.
Very romantic. He's all in, right? That's all the wife needs to remember.
I have you can call it the acronym TTCC: transparency, trust, communication, compromise. And at the end of the day, marriage is an exercise in compromise, right? There's no such thing as this person is right and you're always right, or that person is always wrong. So I think it's as long as you recognize the fact that it's a journey that you have embarked upon, and you have to compromise, because nobody's perfect, including yourself. And as long as you're prepared to compromise and communicate and be transparent with each other, and eventually trust, right? Everything comes with risks, and you're looking for something risk-free, put into a fixed deposit.
One thing that I always tell clients when they come and structure their finances for their families, that I always tell them, what do you think would convince the other side to agree? What do you think you need to say to convince your wife to agree? Because at the end of the day, the difference between disputes is that I'm trying to persuade the court. But when you are structuring and growing something together, I'm trying to persuade you and you're trying to persuade me. So what do I need to do to be able to persuade you so that we can journey together? Right? So I always tell them, what do you think I should be saying to your spouse so that they would agree with you?
Thank you all for that. Before I let you all go, right, the audience, any burning questions, anything you want, any specific panelists, you can even name your panelists.
So it's true that when you first sign the nuptial agreement, because it's before marriage, you don't have children yet. And whenever people come to see me because they have problems in their relationship, it's always very important to tell them, before you are husband and wife, you are father and mother. right? The two of you chose each other. The kids didn't choose to be in this position. Okay, so whatever you think you owe each other or you want to pay to each other, could we talk about what is it that we can do for the children first, because they didn't bargain for this. So you are right that quite often when parties are in a fight, it's all about you and me, you know, but at the end of the day, when we have children, the children will have to come first. Okay, so it's true that it's not automatically upheld, but actually in the Women's Charter, and I did tell you, I'll try not to mention the Women's Charter, but when you go for divorce, the applicable law is the Women's Charter, and in that provision, nuptial agreements is one of the factors that the court has to take into account. And we do have case law that tells us that in certain circumstances, it would be given significant and even critical weight. Right? So the courts will bear it in mind. Okay, so the way I see it, it's a bit like insurance, right? You can't be so sure you have the whole of your insurance payout, but it's better than nothing, right? At least you have that. It's better than nothing. Do all married couples need it? No, not necessarily. So you don't also have to overbuy your insurance. So you don't have to oversell the idea of having a nuptial agreement. But if there is an immediate need, it's something that would make your parents feel better if they let you move in, or they were going to give you the house or let you continue to run the company, then okay, fine. It's a valid document to have that will give you a roadmap to plan going forward.
Just to echo on what we mentioned earlier as well, right? It's a way for you to have that conversation, right? About what is important to you and what you want to get out, what you want to achieve, through the marriage. So, that yes, there's that legal enforceability point where it's important and it's persuasive, but there's, I think, the more fundamental point of, well, this is how you can start a conversation, rather than, hey, I want to talk about money, right? So it's the framework and it's helpful. I think sometimes when it comes to a difficult conversation, any little bit is helpful, right? To help you get started, so that, once you get started, you can move down the path a lot easier.
I'd like to ask Kai Yun a question. So essentially prenuptials, I see the logic in it, but I'm just thinking to myself, so you have a relationship with somebody, you're going to get married, and then you present the prenuptial to the person just before getting married and say that, look, I need you to agree to all this. We've got this. Does that undermine trust, right? Does that undermine the relationship? Does that undermine trust, because I've had instances where my friends have had prenuptials and then the partner says, look, what, you don't trust me? You start off the relationship with a lack of trust and you got to give me this piece of paper. I'm not sure whether everybody is so open-minded, whether it could actually end up being a deal breaker in a relationship.
I must say, for the record, my prenuptial agreements has not sabotaged any marriage to date. So all my clients have gone on to get married, so that's all good. But it's true, and a lot of it, as with all conversations, is to start it early. If you are going to shove a prenup to the poor bride, days before her wedding, it's just unkind. But you already know that in your family, these are the things you've got to face. So the whole point is to muster enough courage and start that conversation earlier rather than later. And at the end of the day, depending on how you frame it, it's also then, as Anthony says, a conversation where you would then be able to assert, what do you then get out of this? Because you see, to me, when you think about it, what do you get if you don't sign the prenup? You will then have your husband and your in-laws perennially structuring their finances because they are guarded against you. And you're going to be married for the rest of your life like that. Isn't it easier if I had this conversation a year before getting married and I tell my husband that, look, whatever your parents are going to give you, I'm not looking at it. I just want to be sure that once we are married, I am family too. I am first family now. I'm first lady now. So can you please make a commitment that what we grow in the marriage place me first? But I agree. Whatever you have before you met me, they were first family. So by all means, set aside for them. Isn't it easier if I got married that way, that they are not on guard against me all the time? So like the prenuptial that I signed today, you can tell that it warmed the parents so much that they started the seed money for the joint account, right? So actually, it's not always a bad, unromantic thing. Also depends on the lawyer you engaged. In fact, it is critical that both parties have separate representations so that the lawyers have a chance to speak to each party separately, and you understand the document that you are going to sign. It's not an easy conversation to ask somebody to sign a prenuptial agreement, but at the end of the day, it's also how we conduct ourselves in the process, right? Because if you gave the person a choice of, okay, it is all or nothing, my parents prepared this document, please find your own lawyer and just sign off, I think it's even less romantic than Excel sheets, okay? So you have to think of a way where it's not all just about you, right? Because the way I see it, like I said, do you prefer not to sign it? You may still end up getting married, but you have a family, you have in-laws who are always going to be up on guard against you anyway. So it means that there is really a problem to be resolved, right? Let's face it, right? So maybe it calls for us to, yes, have our own lawyers, and our own lawyers would then assure the other side's lawyer that, look, at the end of the day, my client is not out to go and get a share of your family's assets. She recognizes what is your parents grew it. It's up to them who they want to give it to. I just want to know that once I marry my husband, we are going to have a family and our own pot together that I'm going to be focused on. So actually, it's a hard conversation, but you are right also in that if you have separate representation, the lawyers bring up the harder subjects, right? That at the end of the day, you are working for your father. Outside, when you work, maybe you get 20,000, but because you work for your father is underpaying you at 5,000. Even if we agree, okay, I'm sorry for your father, but even if you agreed to both put your incomes into a joint account, it's uncomfortable, right? Because you know that your husband may not be getting market rate. So some of these conversations need to be said through the lawyers, and lawyers can come up with strategies for it. So in this particular example, what the prenuptial agreement actually says is that whatever the wife earns and puts into the joint account, the husband can put more if the family pays more, but no less than what the wife is putting into the joint account.
I try not to completely reconcile it. You respect the other party because she may have a stronger risk appetite. I may have because I'm older, I may have a more mellow, lower risk appetite. So, I think end of the day, whatever anybody recommends, you put it into, the overall picture, as long as it doesn't diminish or alter the total risk profile of a portfolio. Because eventually, the problem with a lot of people is that they look at investments in a very singular fashion, right? I buy this, I buy this, I buy this. You should be looking at it more holistically, right? Your investment should be looked at holistically, right? So, so I'll give you an example. Say you had $5 million in total investments and cash, and then you put in $200,000 into, say, something like silver, which was recently very volatile, right? Now, in 200,000 relative to 5 million, it's not a lot, right? So you got to look at things in the bigger perspective. If that's what you have, and your partner says, "Look, let's buy silver," and it's a very volatile asset class, and it carries a lot of risk. Then you tell yourself, "Look, it makes sense," because it's not like turning the whole portfolio upside down, right? So you got to look at it holistically as well. So it's a negotiation, and you got to give and take, and sometimes you have to respect the other party, right? So like, of late, my wife has been investing. She comes to me with proposals, and I listen and I talk to her, and some of it, okay, I may not agree, but then she's got most of it right, which makes me doubt my own investment advice sometimes. So I was like, now I go to her and ask her, so what should I buy next, So, she looks at it from a different perspective, right? Because she's not somebody who's deep diving into this. I spend my morning till night deep diving, and I'm so involved in it. I look at the trees, I cannot see the forest, right? She can see the forest and not the trees. And so sometimes she gives you a different perspective, and you have to respect that, and sometimes and you make mistakes, and you just have to allow your wife or your other partner to make some mistakes, as long as you know it's not something that's highly risky, but if it makes sense and you're able to logic it. And of course, for me, what I'll do is for my own personal investments, I write myself a half a page proposal. For every investment I put into, I write myself a half a page proposal, because I articulate my thoughts down. I know it's kind of funny, but it forces me to sit down and think as to why I invested in what I invested. And when you put it down in paper into half a page, just half a page, maybe like 3 paragraphs, it forces you to really address why you invested in something, as opposed to having some very iffy ideas as to why you invest. So when you do that, yeah. So sometimes I get my wife to tell me, and she articulates it. It may not be as deep as what I think, but makes sense. Makes sense. Go with it, And I think it's give and take.
Sure, I can share my personal experience. So there are two parties to deal with, right? Your own family and how to manage them now that you're about to get married, and your spouse's family and how do you manage them as well. So I start with my own family first. That conversation obviously is going to be easier because this is your family. You know what triggers them, what is acceptable to them. Mine, the window of opportunity was the ang pao period. When you get married, your parents will give you ang pao. So then that naturally is a financial transaction, right? Or like there's an exchange of money. So that's the golden window period to talk about money. So, okay, thanks, Father, you're giving me this amount to help pay for the wedding, everything. Moving forward, I would like to share with you, how I'm thinking about finances. How do I split up my responsibility to you as a son versus me as a father? So that's my side. Now, with my spouse's side, what works best for me was I rely on my spouse to deliver the news. So I never try to impose on their family, because you don't want a case where they say like, oh, you don't know how our family, you don't know our culture, blah, 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 blah. So the spouse has to do. So the first person to convince is your spouse, not their family, because their spouse has to be on board with this. And the way I convince it is that if we don't do it now, it's going to cause us future misunderstanding, pain, friction. Firstly, is through my spouse. And then how I actually raise that conversation is I ask clearly, okay, how much do you think you need to continue providing? What are some of the expectations? And differentiate with my spouse, what is expectation versus entitlement? Because as children, there's a certain point where you keep giving and your family expects you to continue giving. So you may have to do a little bit of work to decouple that. And then eventually, let's say the number is this, but I'm only comfortable with this. Of course, ideally, you want to get to this number. But another thing that I have to remind myself is this is a marriage. Like what Vasu said, this is a compromise. You're not going to get 100% of everything you want. So do you want to be a husband or do you want to be an investor? Because an investor, you're going to press it down. You got a better return out of this. Or do you want to be a husband and realize that there's only so little only so much influence your spouse has with their family, and then you meet them in between. So yes, your return or your portfolio might not be as good, but that is the price to pay as a spouse, as a supportive spouse. So that's where you really have to compromise. So that's how I see it.
I think that there's, again, many ways of framing it, right? So when we talk about prenup, when we talk about all that, sure, it's talking about the ending. But, the way I like to think about it, about having all these difficult conversations, is that this is a way for you to build a foundation together, right? This is what the two of you want out of your shared life. This is what the two of you want to achieve together, and how you view whether you have kids, whether you have all of that. Right? This is about the two of you. And that to me is romantic. My wife would disagree, but that to me is really the gist of all of these conversations. It's not about, oh yeah, I'm planning for the worst because I want to leave you and I want to protect myself. It's about empowering both of you to be able to sit down, work through things together, and build something together. Right? And if push comes to shove, something bad happens, so be it. Right, but that to me is how I would think about having these conversations.
It's just like insurance, right? You don't want to face that thing, but you still buy it and you have that conversation. And earlier Reggie mentioned that we are getting married later as a generation, and divorce rates, like it or not, is going up. So if you are in a situation, you just need to look at the trend line, right? Like if you are getting married later, that means that you have more to lose, and divorce rates are going higher. It's just like buying insurance. Is healthcare cost getting higher? Yes. Is it a higher percentage of people getting critical illness these days? Also, yes. So therefore, you need to protect yourself.
We'll end the conversation for today. Thank you, panelists, again for all of the time. Thank you to the audience as well.